If you thought your landlord was bad, just wait until you hear about this landlady. So Dorothea Puente was born in Redlands, California in 1929 to parents that both struggled with drinking. I guess it was a pretty violent household and it wasn't uncommon for the Puente parents to lay hands on their young daughter. When Dorothea was only 4 years old, her dad passed, and then when she was 6, her mother passed, so she was sent to live in an orphanage until her relatives could later take her in. Once again, at the orphanage, Dorothea explained a lot of physical and emotional trauma from her peers and her caretakers. Her bad luck streak continued when she got married in 1946, only for her husband to suddenly pass away from a heart attack 2 years later. At that point, Dorothea was completely out of money and ended up forging checks to get by. This would eventually land her in jail for a year, but after she served only 6 months, she ended up getting paroled. In 1952, Dorothea married a Swedish guy named Axel, and their relationship lasted for 14 years, but once again, it was an extremely toxic and violent one with a whole lot of booze poured on top. In 1960, Dorothea was arrested for owning and operating a brothel that she pretended was a bookkeeping firm. For that, she was sentenced to 90 days in a Sacramento County jail. Apparently though, you can take the criminal out of jail, but you can't take the criminal out of Dorothea. Because immediately after she was released, she got arrested again, this time for vagrancy, which essentially meant that she got arrested for being homeless and not having a job. After she served her 90 days, a judge ordered Dorothea to a state hospital after she'd been found on a bender and was involved in a few illegal activities and misdemeanors. There, she was diagnosed as a pathological liar with an unstable personality. When Dorothea finally found work as a nurse's aide, though, it seemed like maybe she wanted to put a stop to her life of crime and focus on caring for her patients. Dorothea mainly cared for disabled and elderly patients in their homes, and after a little while, she decided to start managing her own boarding houses. Finally, it seemed that Dorothea could put the past behind her and move on with her life. The end. Ha. Yeah, right. You know what you were in for when you clicked on this video. Okay, so in 1968, Dorothea divorced her husband and remarried a man named Roberto Puente in Mexico City, who was 20 years younger than her. Roberto, as you could have guessed, had trouble staying faithful to Dorothea the cougar, and their marriage only lasted 2 years. Just before that marriage ended, Dorothea became the landlady for a 16-bedroom care home in Sacramento for the homeless in the area. She established herself as a resource for the homeless, mentally ill, and people struggling with addiction. She'd hold AA meetings for people and taught them how to sign up for Social Security benefits and became a prominent member of the community. But again, you knew what you came here for, because pretty soon the House of Horrors would finally claim its first victim. Let's get to the terrible part. So Dorothea said she had adopted and hired this homeless guy who people called Chief to be her handyman, and immediately people thought he was strange. He struggled with drinking and was apparently a bit of a wild card. All of a sudden, people started noticing that Dorothea was making Chief do these weird tasks for her. First, she had him dig up the ground in the basement of the home. Then she had him cart all the soil away in a wheelbarrow, and finally, she had him cover the floor with a concrete slab. She also had him cover a section of the backyard that used to be a garage and a fresh concrete slab as well. After that, Chief mysteriously disappeared. Oh no, not concrete. This is giving me big Kristen Smart vibes with the whole concrete slab in the backyard. Now, anytime a neighbor starts to redo their backyard, we're all gonna be suspicious. In 1976, Dorothea yet again married a violent man who loved his liquor. After a few months, the marriage was done, and Dorothea started spending her free time in local bars looking for men who were old enough to be receiving benefits. She began forging the men's signatures to steal money, but she was eventually caught and charged with 34 counts of fraud. Dorothea really said, go big or go home. And get this, while she was on probation for fraud, she legit picked right back up where she left off and continued forging the signatures of these old dudes. As Dorothea neared 60, she started to rent an upstairs apartment in downtown Sacramento while she still managed the boarding house. And that's when things went. When 61-year-old Ruth Monroe began renting the room with Miss Puente, she would soon be found having OD'd from Tylenol with codeine. Dorothea told the police that the woman's husband was terminally ill and she had been depressed. Obviously, the police believed the old lady and assumed Ruth took her own life. Case closed. But a few weeks later, when the police responded to another call about the body of 74-year-old Malcolm McKenzie, they suspected poisoner Puente with the motive of money. She was convicted with 3 charges of theft in '82 and sentenced to 5 years in jail. Wait, 5 years? That's it? Did they really look at her record and think, yeah, this is just gonna be a one-off sort of thing? 2 bodies within a few weeks? While she was in jail this time, Dorothea started writing letters to her new pen pal, a 77-year-old man named Everson who was retired and living in Oregon. The pen pal relationship got quite steamy, and when Dorothea got out of prison in '85 after serving only 3 years, Everson was waiting for her out front in his red Ford pickup, which sounds like the beginning to a terrible country song. Pretty soon, the two were planning their wedding and opened their joint bank account while they lived in the upstairs apartment. Dorothea Dorothea's 2 previous victims had expired in. But with a husband who seemed to be different from her crappy exes, would Puente the poisoner's career of crime finally be put in the past? Nah, this trick was just getting started. So in November 1985, Dorothea hired this dude named Ismael Flores to work on these wood panels in her apartments. She said in exchange for his work, she'd give him a red Ford pickup truck that belonged to her boyfriend in LA who didn't need it anymore. Uh-oh, this country song's taking a turn. And then she was like, oh, can you do one more thing for me? Since you're so good at this whole wood paneling thing, would you mind building me a box that's 6x3x2 for my books and knickknacks? Then this chick has him transport the now very heavy, completely nailed shut box to some storage depot. But on the way there, Dorothea told him never mind, and they pull over and dump the box on a riverbank dumping site instead. When he asked her why, she told him it was just a bunch of junk she didn't want anymore. One day you're a passion-filled pen pal of Puente, and the next you're just a box of junk. This lady was a psychopath. But in 1986, when a fisherman found the box 3 feet from the bank, he, unlike Ismael, the handyman, knew exactly what it was and called the police. The investigators found a badly decomposing body of an old man that they couldn't identify. The entire time the box was just chilling on the riverbank, Dorothea was writing letters to her late husband's family and collecting his pensions. But Dorothea was smart about all this. She didn't try to pretend to be Everson in the letters. She just told them that he was extremely sick and wrote as herself, the doting wife. The whole time, Dorothea is still running her boarding business, taking in almost 40 tenants, most of them people who struggled with addiction. Despite this making her a pretty decent profit, she still wanted more and started hitting the bars in search of her next customer. God, can you just imagine this creepy old woman coming up to you at a bar without blinking, and she's just like, hi, oh my gosh, you like drinking? That's crazy, me too. You should totally come stay at my place sometime. Anyway, this was how she did it. Her MO, if you will. Every month, Dorothea grabbed the mail before her tenants could and would take out most of the money from their checks. Then she'd only give them a small portion of it. Her tenants would spend what little they had at the bars that night. An anonymous tip would come in about them, and they'd be picked up by the police and thrown in jail for 30 days, and Dorothea would pocket the rest of her tenants' cash. Evil has a name, and it's Dorothea Puente. When police showed up in '88 to question Dorothea about a tenant of hers who had gone missing, they noticed a little bit of soil on her property that looked a bit disturbed. They quickly discovered the body of her tenant, Leona Carpenter, 78, underneath the disturbed soil. Feeling as disturbed as the soil and probably soiling their pants, the police eventually dug up 7 bodies from the Puente property. Dorothea, being a little old white lady, was at first not considered a suspect, so she was allowed to leave the property to buy a cup of coffee. She grabbed her coffee, then immediately fled to Los Angeles. After finding 7 bodies at the boarding house, police suspected that there were definitely more. They also had gotten a ton of calls from relatives of people who had stayed at the boarding house that were now missing. And there were a lot more than 7 names. Around 25, in fact, and police had no idea to figure out who the bodies in the yard belonged to. Not to get too graphic, but Dorothea made sure to remove the identifying parts on one of the bodies to make it harder to identify them. Detectives then believed that Puente was slaying her tenants for their social security checks. 6 days after she fled to Los Angeles, a new friend she'd made at a bar had called the authorities after he recognized her from reports on the TV. Apparently, this dude found it very sus that this old lady was really interested in his disability checks and offered to move in with him and fix him Thanksgiving dinner after just meeting him. Dorothea was then arrested and held without bond, thank God, and faced 7 charges for the 7 bodies found in the yard while the investigation continued. By December 10th, Sacramento police had identified 4 of the victims after extensive x-rays and fingerprinting. In 1992, Dorothea's trial began and would end a year later. The prosecutor called over 130 witnesses to the stand and argued that Dorothea used sleeping pills on her tenants, then would smother them with a pillow. Yikes. That is absolutely gruesome, Granny. He then said that she would hire convicts to dig holes in her yard. The jury was so conflicted over this frail old woman that they could only end up convicting her for 3 of the bodies. Apparently, they couldn't agree on the other 6. Dorothea's defense was really good at making it look like she had this caring side to her, and witnesses, along with her long-lost daughter, testified that she was generous to them and helped them towards successful careers. After days of deliberating from the jury and being deadlocked 7-5, the judge declared a mistrial, which is legal speak for 7 people wanted Granny to go by lethal injection and 5 didn't, so the judge said game over. Dorothea was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and she became the tenant of a women's facility in Central California. Of course, for the rest of her life, Dorothea maintained her innocence and insisted that all of her residents' fatalities were from natural causes. In 1998, this dude named Shane reached out to Dorothea in prison and did an extensive interview with her. It actually ends up lasting over the course of a couple of years, and throughout that time, Dorothea began sending him various recipes. In 2004, the guy published the book, Cooking with a Serial Killer, and it includes the lengthy interviews with Dorothea, as well as almost 50 recipes and some random prison art that she'd sent to him. Dorothea passed from natural causes on March 27, 2011 at the age of 82. But that wouldn't be the last time we'd hear from Dorothea Puente. That's right, baby. I'm talking about spooky ghost grandma, the paranormal Puente. Apparently, the house is quite haunted, and in season 13 of Ghost Adventures, Dorothea Puente's House of Horrors was featured on episode 5. Okay, so the crew shows up at the house in Sacramento, and apparently it's been made into this tourist attraction, and it's completely devoted to her. Field trip, anyone? There's like costumes, statues, signs, and even a mannequin that looked like her. They took the crew through a tour of the house and showed them the room where Dorothea would leave her victims as she waited until they were gone. The Ghost Adventurers then interviewed this old lady named Peggy, who owned the lower part of the house. Oh God, Peggy, run for your life. The 91-year-old woman said she felt a presence in the room where she sleeps, and one night she saw the spirit of an elderly woman standing in her room. She said she was smiling, but not with her eyes. Oh no. In the episode, Zach Baggins and his crew apparently caught the voice of Dorothea Puente threatening the life of the old woman on one of those special ghost recorder things. Can't really say how accurate any of that is, so make of that what you will. A whole lot of crazy stuff happened in the episode, including psychics channeling the spirits of the old tenants who live there, and again, you can decide for yourself what you believe. So how many victims did Dorothea Puente really claim? I don't think we'll ever know, but I believe it's gotta be somewhere in the 20s. And what's up with the paranormal stuff? There's gotta be something seriously wrong with that house. I can't believe someone lives there.